Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Hi, everyone. This is Achuta Bava from Nightlight Astrology. Today, we are going to take a look at Sun and Rising Sign horoscopes for the month of March, and I thought I would do a live stream. Oh, good. The live chat is working this time. It wasn't working last time. So as you guys are all coming in, I'd love to hear where you're coming from. Where are you watching right now? Omaha, I see. Colorado. Good to see you guys. Yeah, so we're going to go through the Sun and Rising Sign horoscopes for the month of March today. I thought I would do a live stream, and if you guys maybe at the end, we'll see how long it takes, because it might take, sometimes it takes a while to get through all 12, but we'll go through all 12 signs. And as we go along, if there are any relevant questions that you have about the placements I'm talking about, feel free to put it in the chat box. I may or may not be able to get to it, depending. Sometimes it streams really quickly and stuff like that. So Richmond, Virginia, Houston, Michigan, Valley Center, Scotland, from England, Singapore, Myrtle Beach, Taiwan, Atlanta, France. Wow, awesome to see all of you. Wilmington, Delaware, another Atlanta. Cool. Another from France. Great, awesome. Well, I'm so glad to have you guys here today. I'm going to put the chart up on the screen and start diving into this month's horoscopes. There's always, as you guys know the drill, there's always a ton of horoscope data to sort through every month. What I do is I look at everything, and then I determine which transits I think are going to have the biggest impact and try to narrow it down to those, and go through each sign and how it's going to affect you. I always recommend, people always ask me which should I watch for? Should I watch for my sun or my rising sign? And I always recommend your rising sign for a couple of reasons. One, your rising sign is going to correspond with your birth chart. So when you're using whole sign houses, then the way to which sign to listen to is going to, if you use your rising sign, it will correspond with the way that your houses are laid out in your birth chart by whole signs. That's probably going to have the most impact, because that would be just like if you were tracking the transits in your own birth chart. Sun signs are going to take your sun sign and put it and make it the first house of a chart. So it's a more like divinatory fictional chart. It's not really specific to your birth chart, but it is specific to your sun sign, as if your sun sign was becoming the first house. I don't particularly resonate with sun sign horoscopes. I resonate with rising sign horoscopes because they always they always match up exactly with my birth chart and whole signs. So that's what I recommend. Portugal, Norway, London, Wisconsin, El Paso, and Philly. Wow. Amazing. Okay, so there are 4 transits that we're going to go through today, and I'm going to go ahead and put the real-time clock up on the screen. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to write them down first. And let's, the other thing that I'm going to do is I learned a new trick on Solar Fire, which actually one of you guys taught me. I don't remember who it was, but someone said, hey, have you tried this? And I was like, no. And it's amazing. I'm going to just fix the houses with Aries on the ascendant for starters. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it forward to March 1st. Now I'm going to write down for you the transits that are going to have the biggest impact this month, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that I'll be covering today. So we've got March 3rd, Mars into Gemini. That's our first one. March 4th, they kind of go together. Mercury conjunct. Oops, I can't spell today. Conjunct Jupiter. So that's March 4th. Those are early in the month. Then about mid-month, you've got the huge new moon in Pisces with Neptune and Venus getting together. That is on March 13th. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Mercury-Neptune conjunction on the 29th at the same time. So March 13th, new moon in Pisces. And then on March 20th, we're going to talk about the Aries ingress, which will coincide with Venus eventually going to the heart of the sun. So those are our 4 transits that we're going to break down for every sign. And I'm just going to, I just figured I'd go through them first and give you a sense of what's coming. Okay, so we're going to start with Aries and we'll go through them each individually. And then we'll have, when you're re-listening to this, we'll have timestamps so that you can jump to the appropriate rising sign if you want to do that. If you want to check your rising sign, by the way, people always ask me if I don't know, where do I find out? You can go to astroseek.com, astro-seek. It's a great free software online. There are others, but that's the one that I typically use if I'm going to use one online. I use Solar Fire. People ask me that every time too. So I've eliminated the nodes of the moon, the part of fortune, the MC, the descendant, the the ascendant, the IC, like a lot of extra paraphernalia that I've just sort of cut out for the simplicity of for the sake of simplicity. Okay, so let's begin with Aries on March 3rd. Now, your ruling planet is Mars, and so seeing Mars get out of its detriment in your financial house could bring you a little bit of a boost. Certainly on the 3rd, you're going to see a shift away from Mars in the financial house in its detriment, along with Uranus, and into a house that has a lot to do with the mind, communication, and speech, the 3rd house. So it heads into that 3rd place. And, the 3rd house, Mars, is particularly good at anything having to do with communication or technology, media, learning, teaching. It's going to add not only a kind of assertive and action-oriented energy, maybe starting new things around technology, building a new website, buying a new cell phone, especially after Mercury's gone direct. It's a good time to do something like that. But also, this is Mars in a Mercury ruled sign in the 3rd house is very strategically intelligent and can often do well making money, is good in kind of with investments or business strategies. So it's a very street smart Mars. Your ruling planet, also could get into some verbal sparring matches, or communication and mental energy could be a little bit more intense. So I would say it's a good month. This is going to last, remember, for over a month. So this energy in your 3rd house, I would say the best way to use it is to well, what I would say is that it's going to find the best way to be used if you are keeping centered in your mind. Because this is one of those, I have Mars and Gemini natally, and I can tell you that meditation has really saved me from this kind of impulsive busyness of mind. So that's a good thing to do this month for you. But anyway, that's a really good looking energy there for you. I like that one, especially given that on the 4th, Mercury and Jupiter are going to conjoin in your 11th house, which is the place of friends and allies. So friends and allies, benefactors, groups of people. And this is a very generous and benefic energy coming through that house. So I would look for some good news or some good opportunities around friends, groups, colleagues, associates, people that, maybe people that belong to a similar religious group, or people that you go to school with, something like that, people that you work for. It's definitely Mercury, Jupiter tends to bring cohesion, agreement, cooperation. It tends to affirm and grant the green light or the thumbs up to something. Like if you had applied for something, Mercury conjoining Jupiter usually says yes. So a really nice energy for you as an Aries this month in your 11th on the 4th as well. Now, going forward, your major transit of the month, everybody's major transit of the month, is going to be happening on the 13th, and that's when we get the new moon. Now, for you as an Aries, this is falling into your 12th house. So arguably, you have one of the more potentially hazardous placements for this new moon. So you have to be really careful. This new moon is very dreamy, visionary, inspired, otherworldly, romantic, but it can also easily get lost in the fog. And the 12th house is a place that is already somewhat prone to taking us off track through our own self-destructive or unconscious patterns. And so watch for the siren call from the 12th house this month, especially from the 13th onward. Now, things are so, and I should say a few more things about this. One thing that I would say that's pretty positive about this placement is that if you're someone who, let's say that you need some time away, you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, this is a very good transit for personal or inward retreating, solitude, meditation. The 12th house was traditionally called the joy of Saturn. And although it is associated with things that often undermine us, either from others or the environment or from within ourselves, or that take us off course, it's related to obscurity and sometimes a feeling of lostness, or almost like being in this weird liminal space. Yes, and if you need that kind of space to get your bearings and to do some healing, some letting go, some emotional inventory, processing of grief or loss, letting go of the past, this is good for those things. But the big beware of a 12th house stellium like this is going to be about just the kind of dramatic degree of self-undoing that we could we could find ourselves in the midst of. So watch for that. Now, when we go forward to March 29th, at the very end of the month, Mercury will eventually conjoin Neptune as well. So it's a little bit of a reprise of the similar energy from the new moon. Now, on March 20th, this energy gets a little bit better for you as an Aries, because the sun is going to ingress into your first house. And then Venus is going to follow within the next couple of days. In between, say, the 22nd and the 28th, Venus is cazimi in your first house. And this is a real moment of personal breakthrough and of the need to make different choices in relationships, or to somehow define yourself in relation to other people, define your values more clearly. And this could also be a moment of coming out of a little bit of a fog. If the earlier part of the month from the new moon, say on the 13th onward for the next week or so, has you feeling a little just out of it, then a restoral or kind of revitalization and a feeling of coming back to yourself and awakening will be there when the sun ingresses into Aries by the 20th. So that's a nice recovery, because that 12th house emphasis for Aries this month is a little rocky. So it's a nice recovery that seems to be coming by the Aries ingress on March 20th. So those are some of the highlights that I'm seeing this month. A lot of air energy, a lot of very social energy in your chart. Good for starting things around groups, collaborations, business, media, learning, technology related things. And then there's also this weird sort of dreamy 12th house energy that could, you could get caught up in it a bit. But then the good news is, again, that the Aries ingress on the 20th should, if you if you get let off course a bit, you should feel like you're coming back to yourself. So that's a good one. All right, let's go on. I'm going to put Taurus in. Whoops, no, I'm not, because I didn't do my little trick. All right, so let's see. All right, I'm going to go to Taurus. We're going to put Taurus in the first house now. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the month and start over. If you're a Taurus sun or rising sign, then what you're going to see is on the 3rd and into the 4th, you're going to see Mars move into your financial house as Venus or Mercury and Jupiter conjoin on the 4th in your professional house. For Tauruses, this has the look of some very good news around money, business, finances, and work. At the beginning of the month, you're seeing this. First of all, it's nice to get Mars out of debilitation in Taurus in your first house. If you've been feeling lethargic, if you've been dealing with health issues, if you've been just a little bit more ornery or inert, or kind of, just dealing with personal conflict, Mars going into your second house, not debilitated any longer, immediately relying on a Mercury that's conjoining Jupiter in the career house, it looks to be a good time for advancement, investment, new business ideas, revenue, maybe some degree of success or promotion at work, new purchases, maybe, yeah, like new investments or purchases. And just it has them, to me, the look of like good overall approval or some form of blessing or benefit that's coming in, and probably both professionally and financially. This is, I think, and again, it could be related to those airy things like technology, media, communication, and so forth. Now, when you move forward to the 13th, your transit of the month is a little bit better than Aries, who's got it going on in the 12th house. You have it going on in the 11th house. So the new moon in Pisces is landing in your 11th house, a place that was associated with wishes, hopes, and dreams for the future. Why? Because this house, by means of the primary motion of the sky, is going to become the 10th house next. This is like a clock. It keeps moving around. So Pisces is aimed at the top of the sky right now, and that's where it's heading to if it's in your 11th house. So a new moon in Pisces often represents the start in the 11th house of a new social connection, social collaboration, the beginning of endeavoring towards some new dream or ideal that is not going to manifest right away. It's going to take a while to build. It's in the future, but the seed gets planted during this cycle. I would say make sure that what you're getting into is substantive. Make sure that you're, make sure that you're not getting caught up in a group that is unreal in some way, or not like lacking substance. It would be a bad time to potentially join. You could very easily get lost in some kind of cult, or you could very easily, you could be given some social or professional opportunities, and some of them may not be real. They may not pan out. And so all that glitters is not gold in terms of the different kinds of associations, people, groups, and opportunities that are coming up. But at the same time, if you're discerning and careful and thoughtful, there probably will be other possibilities that also present themselves that are really inspiring and exciting. And there's no reason to just look a gift horse in the mouth. If something good comes along, it probably is good. So, but watch for it to come through the area of groups, friends, wishes for the future, collaborations with other people, and so forth. Now, again, on the 29th, Mercury is going to conjoin Neptune in that place. The same bewares are there, the same gifts or blessings are there, but it'll sort of be reiterated by the end of the month. Now, the Aries ingress, which happens around March 20th for you, takes the sun into the 12th house. Now, the Aries ingress is a big deal because we're also going to get between, say, the 22nd and the 28th, you'll see Venus comes through and starts conjoining with the sun in the 12th house. Here it is right here. So this is interesting because this is a little bit of, it's a rebirthing moment for Venus, which typically means that we're going to be taking inventory in our relationships, work relationships, intimate personal friendships, love or marriage relationships. But this one has the mark of maybe some conflict around it, or of having to, take some kind of stand, or perhaps engage in, well, Venus doesn't love conflict, but in Aries and at the heart of the sun, it's almost like what I'm reminded of is the image when I was in like grade school and we would be out on the playground and all of us guys would be playing football, and we'd pick teams. There'd be two captains and they'd take turns picking people, and it's like, I pick you and I'm not picking you. It's almost the way that your preference could get you in trouble somehow, or what you say you like could be controversial, or what you say you do or don't, who you do or don't want to be associated with, could come into the forefront right now. So watch for that around the 20th, but also all the way through the 28th. And I would also see this as a time of, there's a labor when the sun is in the 12th house, exalted in Aries, but in the 12th house, which is a place that was associated with the pains of labor that come before childbirth. So, just think of, you might be entering into a phase all the way until about April 20th, thereabouts, where it feels like there's a labor. And then when you hit, late April, the sun's going to move into your first house, and you should feel like a rebirth, like a liminal space that you've been in, sort of laboring through. That might be a little contentious, is opening up, and you're feeling a lot better. Okay, so that's my take for Tauruses this month. I'm going to now shift again, and let's take a look at Gemini. So if you're a Gemini rising, it's a big month for you because Mars is going to be coming into your first house. Let's go back to the beginning of the month, and I'll show you what that looks like. So here on March 3rd, if you're a Gemini rising, there's Mars entering your first house. If Mars isn't debilitated and it's entering your first house, I typically love that transit. It's going to give you energy. It's going to give you a certain amount of confidence. It's going to give you the sense of motivation that you need to get things done. I love this transit for Geminis this month in terms of like renewal or restoration of health or diet or exercise. Also, starting something. Mars in the first house is like quintessential. I am starting something new. It's inceptional. Now you're connecting that to the 9th house, where on the 4th, Mercury and Jupiter are going to conjoin. This is the 9th place associated with higher learning and the higher mind, religion and spirituality, long journeys, foreign countries, pilgrimage. It's associated with the gods, divination, astrology even. I wonder if what you're starting, if what you are conceiving of around this time is related to the higher mind, if it's related to teachers, if it's related to education or religion or travel somewhere. I think it's likely that the two things coincide, or that the feeling of personal renewal is being spurred on by some revelation that's happening spiritually or intellectually for you this month. And that's been there for a while. It's a big year for Geminis in that 9th house, as I mentioned. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that in last month's video as well. All right, so that's the early part of the month on the 3rd and the 4th. Let's go forward to the 13th. Now, for you on the 13th, you're going to see the new moon coming through in the sign of Pisces in your 10th house. That is the place that is associated with your work or activities out in the world, typically your career. I love this transit for you in terms of there being new, inspiring, imaginative, and kind of expansive activities or jobs or changes in your career. You could see anything from promotion to job changes to, some kind of new project. It feels inspired. Now, of course, as always, is it real? Is it substantive? Is there something in this longing or this fantasizing that's unhealthy? Those are always the questions to ask when you have an exalted Venus conjoined with Neptune, but this energy, again, I'm trying to stay positive about it this month because I do think by and large, this is a very inspiring energy for everyone. And for Geminis, you're going to find it coming through your career house. And it's reiterated again with Mercury, your ruling planet, conjoining Neptune in the 10th on March 29th. Now, if you're a Gemini, that's not your happiest place. Pisces is not for your ruling planet if you're Gemini rising, because it's easy to get lost in reverie, fantasy, emotional, theatrical, kind of romantic energies. If you're an artistic type, there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but it's a place where Mercury can get overwhelmed, flooded, or lost in the clouds. A little bit like the 7 of Cups, if you know that card from tarot. Guys looking up into the clouds, there's all these cups filled with different fantasy animals crawling out of them. So there may also be, what's the signal this month versus what is static? What's let me get down to the real essence of what I'm being called to do versus, and what I can actually manage, versus what's unreal. And that process, don't be surprised if you also have some degree of real discontent, that kind of divine discontent I've talked about with Pisces in your career house this month. Okay, well, if we move to the 20th, then you get the Aries ingress along with the Venus cazimi between the 22nd and the 28th. So like the 20th through the end of the month is a story of Venus and the sun in your 11th house, an exalted sun with Venus being reborn in the 11th house. Something's really shifting for you socially, in terms of groups of people, friends, allies, larger social collaborations. And again, this is a moment where you're trying to define and assert something, and you may have to break with others, or it may come at the cost of certain kinds of relationships, or redefining or reprioritizing your time or energy within groups or people that you associate with. But overall, I like this energy. It could come with a little bit of stress socially, but I think it'll turn out just fine. Okay, so if you're a Gemini, these are the main energies for the month that I'm looking at for you. I'd love to hear from you guys, hear how everything goes, and leave your comments in the chat box for me for later. I'm not looking at them just yet. If I find, actually, I was hoping I might be able to take questions, but I'm finding it too hard to pay attention. I'm having trouble talking because I'm looking at the chat box, and then I'm looking at this, and I'm like, blah, 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 getting all jumbled. So I'm just going to not look at the chat box. All right, so now we're going to switch to Cancer rising. Cancer rising, the Mars energy is coming into your 12th. Not the easiest place for Mars. Let's go back to the beginning of the month and take a look. This is going to come in on March 3rd. Mars is going to ingress into Gemini in your 12th house. You'll see that right here. So that's a little bit tough if you're a Cancer rising. You know, Mars moving through your 12th house for quite some time can bring up a number of different levels of conflict. Conflict with people that you work with, conflict because Mars rules your 10th house of 10th house of career. Conflict around children is possible. You'll notice that as the Mars is ingressing, Moon is in its fall in the 5th house of children. So the topic of children and pregnancy could be a little bit difficult this month, as well as work. Mars in that place can be mentally and emotionally overwhelming for Cancer risings. So it's a very good month stretch month plus stretch to practice your meditation. And just like it was for Aries risings, where you're taking Mars in that 3rd house, and it can be mentally overwhelming. You want to be sure that your own mental and emotional patterns or habits aren't getting the best of you this month. This is a more challenging month in some ways for Cancer risings. It's again, there's an in-betweenness to this month with Mars in your 12th house, working through things mentally and emotionally, working through different kinds of doubts or insecurities or uncertainties. You also have to be careful of communication this month. Communication could easily get you into some trouble if you're not careful. But you're also going to see that this potentially like undermining influence of Mars in the 12th house is also related to the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction that's happening on the 4th of the month. So that conjunction can be really good in terms of benefits that come from other people, paying off debts, getting loans, in terms of partners' financial situation or beneficial connections with other people in business or in any walk of life, really. But there is also this question about speech, communication, knowledge, teaching, and like I imagine this as being a month where a Cancer could feel attacked verbally or mentally by someone or something, or feel like they've said the wrong thing, or potentially almost like having to communicate about something really tricky or difficult, or they could look at the way in which they have become a source of problem for someone else that's trying to get something done. And you have to look at that really. If you're the one standing in the way of something this month, there's maybe some deep lessons there for you. So these are some, but I do think the benefit of this is that you're working through things mentally and emotionally that are a little bit more turbulent, but the possibility of collaboration with others and things coming together despite that is there for you. You just have to be a little extra careful that the mind isn't your enemy this month. Okay, so let's go forward to the 13th. I love the new moon for Cancer. So this is your silver lining. The new moon falls in your ninth place, related again to religion, spirituality, philosophy, higher education, teachers, gurus, long journeys, foreign countries. There is a lot of good energy for you in this house. If there's any place that I would like to see a Venus-Neptune conjunction, it would be in the ninth house, because it fits very well with the, what do I want to say? Almost like a religious festival, or communion with like women in a spiritual setting. It looks really good for the romantic and aesthetic elements of learning, or it looks like devotion, and it has the feeling of inspired religious, spiritual, or intellectual states of mind. So I love this one as a transit that's opening the door to a new platform, spiritually or intellectually. And that will be reiterated on March 29th when Mercury and Neptune get together there again. Again, the beware is, of course, not a good month to join a cult. not a good month to get lost in people who are trying to share some kind of knowledge in order to use you or take advantage of you. It would be easy to get lost in almost like someone who's passing themselves off as some sort of savior, like, oh, this person, this is my savior. And maybe they're just, maybe there's a hidden or unseen or deceptive element at work. So that's the beware. But I don't want to spend too much time on that, because I really do think that an exalted Venus isn't going to give you the most negative significations here. It's probably going to have more to do with that kind of timeless, subtle, beautiful, inspiring quality. Okay, so then the Aries ingress. The Aries ingress as a Cancer really couldn't be better for you, because it's going to enter its exaltation in your 10th house. And then between the 22nd and 28th, you're going to get Venus moving into the conjunction with the sun. It's Cazimi for that period of time. There's a big rebirth happening around your career. And you may also, given the presence of Mars in your 12th, be going through some kind of public level of redefining your values, or something happening in the workplace that challenges certain kinds of relationships or values. And I could see that being a little bit tense, but overall there's a lot of strength here, and you're trying to work through something this month that is challenging, and it's going to force you to take actions and define your values very clearly, especially in the workplace. So that's what I've got for you if you're a Cancer rising. All right, I'm going to switch now to Leo. I'm going to put Leo on the ascendant. We'll run it back and go to the second and third. Here's the third. Okay, it's good. So if you're a Leo rising, Mars is going to be in your 11th house. And that means that it's moving into the place of friends, the place of groups, the place of allies. It's also, as I mentioned earlier, a place that is associated with dreams and wishes for the future. If you've been laboring in your career for the past month plus with Mars in your 10th house and its detriment, and things have been kind of like more inert, and you've been pushing through things, there's been some degree of conflict or difficulty you've been trying to work through in your career, I love this as a moment of you beginning to recover from a period that's been more strenuous around work, and starting to find allies who are like-minded. The reason that I like this idea of allies who are like-minded is because on March 4th, you're going to see Mercury conjoin with Jupiter in your 7th house, a place associated with our relationships. Could be good fortune coming in through a spouse or marital partner, or just good things in general coming in through intimate relationships with Mercury, Jupiter conjoining in your 7th. But also, given that Mars is in Mercury's sign in the 11th, I like this idea of accord, agreement, compromise, and collaboration with others that peaks or reaches a really nice expression right around the 3rd and the 4th. So I think those are really good transits for Leos this month that I really like. Now, I'm going to push forward to that new moon. Now, again, for Leos, the new moon is going to be potentially a little bit more difficult. There's some really good stuff here, and there's some bigger bewares here for me on this one. The new moon in the 8th is connecting a whole new cycle with a lot of romantic and very inspired, dreamy energy with the house that's associated with other people's money, debts and obligations that other people have to us or that we have to them. So the best side of this would be you're receiving something really amazing from someone else, or there's some kind of opportunity that is collaborative in nature, maybe financially, or that there's just some way that something that someone else has is blessing you somehow. And that could be really super great with an exalted Venus and a new moon around Neptune. Kind of the idea of something almost miraculous coming in. And so that I feel like there's gradations of that level of like some great blessing coming through someone else, or a debt forgiven or paid off, something that's being released karmically that bonds you to someone else in a negative way. So there's releasing, forgiving of debts, receiving of blessings from other people. The very karmic stuff, though, very emotional too. And then on the other hand, I think the worst of this is being completely diluted into something that you'll get entangled in that will be potentially way more than you bargained for. So I would be very careful of offers that are, like the psychic or karmic fine print on things that you're being offered to get involved in around the 13th and onward. So that's my take on the 8th house for the Leos. You go to the 20th of the month, and the ingress for the sun is, I think, really good. And here between the 20th and say the 28th of the month, with Venus going through the Cazimi with the sun in your 9th house, you've got an exalted sun that's your ruling planet again, your ascendant ruler, in the 9th place, which was called the joy of the sun, the house of God. And it was related to spirituality, religion, higher truth, etc. So I love this as a moment of defining your beliefs very clearly within certain key relationships, or perhaps somehow related to your work. Venus is the ruler of your career house. So, but just almost like, I see this almost like a declaration of belief or of philosophical commitment that becomes very clear and strong, or something to do with education or learning or teachers or teaching, something that has to do perhaps with some kind of conflict or dispute that you're going to take a stand on somehow. So that's what I've got for the last part of the month. All right, so that's my Leo. That's for Leo risings. Let's go ahead to Virgo. I'm going to put Virgo on the ascendant now. And we'll roll it back to the beginning of the month. Now for Virgos, I love the Mars transit for you guys this month. Mars is going to ingress on the 3rd into your 10th house. That's the workplace. To me, unless Mars is debilitated or its host is really badly debilitated, when you put Mars into the 10th house, you're looking at action, and you're looking at hard work and perseverance and determination and all of the great sort of valorous qualities of Mars paying off and delivering in your career house. So for Virgo risings, I love this as a time of being very busy and active and high achieving and socializing and finding connections and being productive and stuff like that. Usually, again, all around your work, perhaps something that's technological in nature too. Now, you have a lot going on as a Virgo this year in your 6th house. So it's not going to be without a lot of hard work or having to persevere or even work through situations that you may feel are below you somehow. But hard work and perseverance should pay off. The conjunction of Mercury and Jupiter that's happening on March 4th in your 6th house can deliver good news and rewards or benefits for having labored or persevered through something. Or it can also be almost like an announcement that I am going to work really hard on something. I'm going to start a project, or, I'm going to take up a creative, like a creative practice of some kind, or I'm going to learn or study something, or I'm going to teach other people something, or I'm going to build a website, or it has the feeling of innovation, but also like I'm going to do something that's going to require a lot of me, and I'm going to do it, and I will do it, and I'll get it done. So I love this as a vote of confidence from the universe, this month for you in starting new things around work or, your professional life in particular. But also make sure that you're really clear about your beliefs and ideas this month, because that Mercury Jupiter conjunction on the 4th will be much more supportive of you if you're also very clearly communicating where you stand, what you value, and what you want to see happen. Okay, so if we go to the 13th, this is maybe the most romantic placement for the new moon in Pisces. It's happening in your 7th house of marriage, a house that was associated with sexuality, marriage, intimacy, and intimate partnerships of any kind. So with the new moon there on the 13th, you can expect the whole cycle to really be centered around relationships. And the most basic advice is if healing and beauty and a real uplifting energy comes through relationships for you, just accept it with open arms. Don't be overly skeptical. Don't be overly critical. Don't be so busy with work with Mars in your 10th that you don't allow time for new relationships that need more emotional tending. Don't be overly rational about things this month. Allow yourself to be overwhelmed or to go along with the magic that might come in through other people or someone new that you're meeting. On the other hand, this is the Don Juan transit, right? This is the Don Juan. Someone called it a Don Juan yodeler yesterday. I laughed out loud when I read it. Like a Don Juan, singing outside your window. That the guy who doesn't have a job, right? So just make sure it's real. That's all. That's all I have to say about that. Okay. Then we go to the 20th, and you're going to see the Aries ingress along with Venus in the 8th house. Now, this one is tricky. The Aries ingress brings a lot of energy into the 8th house, which, if you've been listening along to this point, you've heard me say this a few times, but the 8th place is going to emphasize our karmic entanglements with other people emotionally, financially, etc. What do we owe and what are we owed? And again, the ultimate bill is death. We all owe the bill of death, but there's a sense of receiving reactions from previous actions that comes along with this house, often in the form of like what feels like penalties or harder learning, experiences, sometimes even a little traumatic. But also the things that we receive from other people come from the 8th house. And there is sometimes just a very positive aura around 8th house transits, that we receive things from other people because they value us or because they appreciate us. And that doesn't have to be, so the debt doesn't have to be negative. I owe you, I have like a gratitude for people, and that leads me to wanting to give or do things for people. And sometimes that's what binds us to others. So anyway, this exalted sun in the 8th should bring in very positive connections with other people, although it can also bring in very forceful and more intense and combative situations with other people. But either way, I think the good news is that you'll be the need or desire to clear things with other people where there are confusions or complications that are undesired. That's a very positive there for you this month. You're not messing around this month if you're a Virgo, because you've also got Mars in your midheaven. So the need to clear or cut or sever ties that aren't working is very strong for Virgos this month. As well as potentially people who say, I like what you're doing. I like your ambitiousness. I like your project. I want to help or contribute in some way. You could see that as well. And watch for those things specifically between the 20th and say the 28th. All right. So that's what I've got if you are a Virgo. Let's go on to Libra. Okay. So for Libras, we're going to back this up to the beginning of the month again, and we're going to look on the 3rd at Mars entering your 9th house. And then on the 4th, Mercury and Jupiter conjoining in your 5th. This is an interesting combination. First of all, Mars going into your 9th house makes it important that you are very clearly or like demonstrably saying something or communicating something about your beliefs, your ideals, your philosophical commitments. You're being led by the god of war in the house of knowledge and beliefs, in the house that's associated with the higher mind. So whether it's learning something, going back to school, somehow taking a stand about something that you believe in or care about, maybe even some degree of mental conflict around beliefs or differing beliefs or ideals this month, especially in romantic relationships. We'll see that again with the Aries ingress into your seventh house. Those could all be on the table. And also just action. I'm going to take some kind of action to teach, to learn, to travel abroad. Any of those would fit very well with Mars in the ninth house. Now, on the 4th, you're going to see Mercury, go through the conjunction with Jupiter in the 5th. I think that there is good fortune for you this month because the 5th house was called the house of good fortune. It was associated basically with anything that we would, potentially receive from a previous lifetime that was like a credit on the account that we had. That's one of the ways Indian astrologers talk about the 5th house sometimes. And you can, again, Mercury, Jupiter is like the letter in the mail, the check in the mail, the thing that comes that you weren't expecting that gives you some kind of good news in the house of, good fortune. So there's something very supportive coming through for you in the early part of the month, I would say. It may be somehow tied also to the idea of teachers, knowledge, religion, spirituality, learning, something like that. This would be a time where I wouldn't be surprised to see someone get a scholarship, or I wouldn't be surprised to see someone overjoyed to take some kind of new class, that you find a teacher, you find a subject that you're passionate about, or even that you find you renew or restore your faith in something. Or also just the idea that something that brings you joy suddenly takes on greater prominence and you want to spend some time learning or studying more about it. So watch for those kinds of energies in the early part of the month. Also, potentially good energy around children this month and education of children somehow. Okay, let's go on to the 13th. Maybe one of the other harder placements of the month for the new moon. It's in your 6th house if you're a Pisces. The positive of this placement, the new moon in Pisces in your 6th, is the potential for healing work to be done, or for there to be some degree of emotional and romantic healing. At the same time, I could very easily see a Libran person not right now, because of the 6th house, having to struggle through it. It's almost like, how can I make a good thing more difficult than it needs to be? That could be a problem for Libras this month, or looking, that phrase of looking a gift horse in the mouth. Like, don't be overly critical of the good things that are coming in. Why do I say that? Because the 6th house was called the joy of Mars and the house of conflict. You have this very romantic, kind of dreamy energy coming through that house. And then you've got the Aries ingress that's going to bump into your 7th house right after it. So there's an emphasis on relationships that's coming through, and love, but also something that's labored or hard or challenging about it emotionally, potentially. The other thing that I would mention here is compassion, emotional healing, some kind of charitable work, selfless service, and also being careful that you don't overly sacrifice, or don't become a martyr. That would be a good one for Libras this month. And try to accept the good things that come. Don't make them more difficult than necessary. I feel like that could be a real theme. And I'm saying that because you're also going to see on the 20th, all the way through the end of the month, that the exalted sun, the Aries ingress, will move into your 7th house of marriage and relationships, where Venus is going to be afflicted, in Mars's sign, but also Cazimi at the heart of the sun. So there's just a feeling to me of some kind of emotional challenges around relationships this month for Librans, but a rebirth that needs to happen, that's looking to happen at the same time. I just kept coming back to going like, oh, don't stress out. This is a good thing. Don't make it too hard. I feel like sometimes Librans get paralyzed by things when it shouldn't be as difficult as to make a choice, or to accept accept your own desire, like accept that this is what I want, this is what I need. So having to work through something around relationships and trying to make something as uncomplicated as possible around love is what stands out to me. At the same time, if ties need to be broken and part of the emotional healing has to do with letting go of a relationship and you have to make that clear, then have the courage. But again, say it plain and simply. Don't drag it out. Don't make it too hard on yourself. Don't stress your mind out this month. You're going to see a little reiteration of Mercury and Neptune by the end of the month. So you may feel a little confused, and just try to, simplest thing I can think of is almost like, don't overthink it. Okay. Sorry, I know my advice for Librans is probably the most intuitive. I have this really strong feeling about it. Okay, so that rebirthing around the house of relationships again from the 20th to the 28th. All right, I'm going to move forward now to put Scorpio on the ascendant. So if you're a Scorpio rising, let's bring it back to the beginning of the month. Scorpio rising, the Mars energy is a little bit more tricky for you because it's moving into your 8th house. With Mars in the 8th house, to be just totally honest, given that on the 4th, Mercury is also going to conjoin Jupiter in your 4th house, I can't help but wonder if there could be some conflict around. This would be like classic conflict in the 8th house of inheritance with Jupiter, Mercury in the 4th house. Are there conflicts happening around home, property, family, marriage, and money? Like that would be potentially one challenging dimension to this. Are we trying to, like I actually happen to know a Scorpio rising who is going to be dealing with, what do you say? What are they called? A prenuptial agreement. They're making a prenuptial agreement because they both had previous marriages, they have kids, they have properties, like blah blah blah. So they have to have like a prenuptial arrangement so that neither of their kids and their estates and stuff like that get messed up. I mean, estates, they're not like billionaires or anything, but their stuff doesn't get messed up. So they're doing a prenuptial agreement. That's probably going to be happening in the first week of March. You can see something like that happening where you're trying to work out something around home, family, property, parents. There's an aura of like celebration and good energy coming in around the place of home, family, land, and property, or parental or family karma. But there could be some degree of conflict with other people around those things given Mars's presence in the 8th house. On the other hand, trying to work out what's fair and trying to negotiate and come to some form of agreement around the topics of marriage and relationships, or home, family, property, land, and relationships with other people, or even business partnerships with other people, is what really stands out to me here. Okay, so let's move along then. That's the early part of the month. And I really do think that there's good news coming in around the topics of home, property, and family for the most part right now, with Mercury and Jupiter conjoining the early part of the month. Go forward to the 13th. And when you get to the 13th, the new moon is coming through in your 5th house. One of the better placements for this new moon. 5th house, again, is the place of Venus. It was called the joy of Venus and the house of good fortune. It's associated with the arts, with beauty, romance, children, pregnancy, creativity, anything that is pleasure, gives pleasure or is enjoyable. And it's also a place that is associated with just good stuff that happens to you for no real reason. It's just like one of the ways I heard one of my astrology teachers explain it was Robert Schmidt once said that going to the grocery store and you happen to meet someone who owes you $15. I think this was in the 90s. $15 maybe isn't that much anymore. Then they give you $15, and they're like, I didn't go to the grocery store to get $15 that you owe me, but now that I am here, what good fortune, right? So it's like that. For the arts, for creativity, for romance, for getting pregnant, like this is a very fertile, lush, happy transit. The downside is this place is also associated with hedonism and reckless self-indulgence. That's some of the things that Venus is sometimes associated with, where your desire body takes over and you're not able to see clearly. So you do want to watch for that. Now, after this happens, what's interesting is the sun's ingress is going to go into the 6th house. And again, that's going to happen by about March 20th. And then you get Venus coming through the cazimi with the sun from like the 22nd to the 28th. So there's this rebirthing energy around relationships that could be a little bit conflicted. It's a weird turn that things are taking. And one thing that I thought would be, okay, if you're in a relationship and you're not happy, that 5th house new moon could very easily introduce an affair or a betrayal or a romantic lust of some kind that comes in and sabotages your existing relationship. So you do want to be careful of that, because the Venus Sun conjunction in the 6th could indicate some degree of difficult resetting or recalibrating in a romantic relationship or in any kind of relationship that could be fraught with a little bit of conflict, right? So you want to be careful of that, that whatever the Neptune energy signifies on the 13th, that it isn't setting you up for some kind of heavy relationship showdown between the 20th and the 28th. On the other hand, the positive of that placement is going to be the ability to shoulder a weight or a burden and find others who are willing to shoulder it with you, or to work through something. What do I want to say? There's a sense of being rewarded for Herculean effort with an exalted sun in the 6th house. Generally speaking, like it's a good time to, just like we were talking earlier about Mars in the 10th house, right? There's this sense of I'm going to persevere and I'm going to work hard, and there's honor in that, and it will pay off if I stick with it. You could also be very belligerent with the exalted sun in this house and have a puffed up ego and, take to a lot of conflicts with other people. Be careful of Mars in the 8th house this month. But generally, I think rewards for hard work, if you stay modest and humble and try to steer clear of like really intense conflicts with other people. Okay. So that's the story for Scorpios. I'm going to put Sagittarius on the ascendant now. All right, so if you're a Sagittarius, let's back it up to the beginning of the month. That Mars energy on March 3rd is going to come into your 7th house. Push it into the 7th. Here it is. So there's Mars in your 7th house on the 3rd. It's going to be there for quite a while. There's the god of war coming into the house of relationships. So on the downside, you might be looking at conflict in relationships. Be careful, because you'll see that on the 4th, there is a Mercury-Jupiter conjunction that essentially that the conflicts aren't due to some kind of intellectual, what do I want to say? Having trouble talking today. Sorry, guys. An intellectual pride or an arrogance or a puffed up idea of some kind. Really aggrandized thoughts and ideas can come through Mercury and Jupiter in the 3rd at their worst, that are maybe very rigid in a Saturn-ruled sign. And then Mars wants to go to battle with other people about them in the 7th. So that's the thing to be careful of. The thing that I think might be very positive is that Mercury-Jupiter is a very hopeful placement and could point to some kind of meaningful social dynamics happening in your life that are supportive and that are working or driving together in step. So Mars in the 7th can mean collaboration of effort, of will. And then it's meeting with the good news and confirmation of Jupiter, Mercury in the 3rd. It's like, we agree, let's do it. That kind of energy. So I think that's the positive and the negative of that placement. It's very strong the first couple of days of the month, so watch for that. Now on the 13th. On the 13th is the new moon, and that's going to land. Oh, let me back it up so we get the moon actually in Pisces. Okay, so new moon in Pisces in your 4th house. I think this is one of the more interesting placements, because the 4th house is, first of all, big new moon in that 4th house is going to point toward home and family karma. deep emotional stuff and water stuff. Like watch for water and the home to be a conversation, going to the ocean or the beach, emotional healing and restoration of old wounds, the almost like the letting go of or surrendering of old pains and hurts from the deep past. Changes that are exciting happening within the family, a sibling or sister going to get married, or someone's getting remarried, or someone's moving or buying a home, or children are being born. But I could see there being a pretty new and uplifting chapter around topics of home and family. Now, the negative here is going to be about the smoke and mirrors, the deception, and patterns potentially of escapism or of emotional loss, or almost like it could be a little Shakespearean in the home and family house this month. So don't be surprised, and make sure that you're also not being led into, like, this would be a great month to look at patterns of, say, addiction or substance abuse in the home and family with Venus, Neptune, and a new moon all together. Looking at legacy of religious or spiritual commitments, beliefs around home and family. So some healing to do there, but I think also there's a very celebratory and renewing energy to that transit. Okay, so let's go forward to, oops, I'm going by hours. I need to go by days, to the Aries ingress. So then the Aries ingress is going to move into the 5th house, and then Venus follows, and then the 22nd through the 28th, they're moving together on the same degree. That's a loose timeline, but so there it is right there. So then what's interesting is, again, the 5th house is this place of good fortune. There's a big, Aries ingress, exalted sun moving into that house. It would be a great time to see people benefiting from their fathers or from family or land, and also perhaps being given some kind of resource with which you can start something. The 5th house was associated with the wealth or the money or the assets or resources of the father or of the family in general. So something about wealth, money, property, land, family kind of coming up wouldn't surprise me. Also the topic of children and pregnancy, and some emphasis on that, maybe a little bit of conflict. I could see parents who are going through a divorce being conflicted about how to split time with kids, custody battles. So you do want to be careful of some degree of conflict around children or pregnancy. I could see this being a time where, a woman's, going through that rocky, sick period while pregnant. But I don't see anything disastrous here, but just a little bit of conflict around that area. Also, I love this as a space of celebrating with other people, going out and doing something fun with other people, like going to a concert. I mean, people aren't really going to concerts as much, I guess, but just there's a, the Aries 5th house people like to have fun. That there's an adventurous, let's go full throttle quality. This is for Sagittarius risings, of course. And then when you see the sun moving into that house, it's often like, let's get outside, let's do things, it's like the spring energy is rising in a house associated with pleasure and fun and recreation. So watch for that. Okay. So that's the Aries ingress at the end of the month. And yeah, I think last thing I want to say is just to reiterate, with Mars in your 7th, just, don't be surprised if there is some challenges, mental and communicative challenges in relationships. Be there for over a month, but you'll get through it. All right, I'm going to go on to Capricorn. We'll put Capricorn on the ascendant. We'll back up to the beginning of the month. And you can see that Mars is going to ingress into Gemini in your 6th house. Now, if you're a Capricorn rising, this is interesting because on the 4th, you have a really good conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter in your 2nd house of money, finances, and resources, while Mars is going into the 6th, which is often associated with things that you have to overcome or work through. Mars is in its joy in the 6th house. So it's a good place for Mars. But given the simultaneous conjunction of Mercury and Jupiter in the 2nd, which would appear as some kind of financial blessing or opportunity, or maybe a big purchase or something like that, what would it mean that Mars simultaneously is going through a house where it often has to work hard to overcome something or move through frustrations or difficulties or kind of be a fighter? Well, I would say that this is an opportunity that's going to come with, a price tag of a lot of energy behind it. You're going to have to exert a lot of energy and take a lot of actions to capitalize on something that seems to be coming through. Either that, or be careful that you're not making a purchase that makes you a slave to a credit card bill for a while or something like that. That there's not that the potential for some degree of conflict around money or purchases is there, but I think the more positive or hopeful interpretation here is that there are some financial or business opportunities or something like that that's going to require effort, but that the energy is there to get things done. Notice that Mars is going into a trine with Saturn in the 2nd house. That's a very disciplined and mature, productive energy, and it's probably related to something beneficial that's happening around work or money. Okay, so let's go to the 13th. On the 13th, we've got the new moon. For you, that's going to fall in your 3rd house. So you've got the new moon in Pisces on the 13th. Here it is. Now, this one I'm a little concerned with. The reason is that this is a place that is associated with the mind. Now, being enchanted, by the imagination, by fantasy, by, a kind of romantic interlude for about a month this year while the Pisces energy is passing through. And again, on March 29th, when Mercury conjoins Neptune in the 3rd house, maybe it's not that big of a deal, But this is the one place where I would be like, you could really lose the plot, because anytime where you're overlapping with a house that has a lot to do with the mind and the mind's ability to keep order and cohesion in the details and organization of energy, time, and effort in a day-to-day way, you're either getting, it could be a great time for a vacation or a break, a great time to bring something like meditation into the daily environment, a good time for something artistic or some creative medium to flow through you and be communicated with the world. And those are all very positive things. And even sometimes maybe healing with siblings or, something happening around you that there's an energy coming in that's going to be very graceful. And, for Capricorns, an emotional energy like this can be very healing. Sometimes Capricorns don't always have the easiest time with emotional life. So maybe some emotional healing, stuff like that. The downside is losing the plot, like mentally getting drawn out to sea somehow. And it's the potential for that is a little stronger in this house, in my opinion. Okay. So if you go forward from there, the Aries ingress then happens in the 4th house. Again, this is like the 20th towards the end of the month. And you're going to see Venus conjoin with the sun in the 4th house. And this happens between like the 22nd and the 27th, 28th. So now this Aries ingress energy means that there's like a new beginning, a lot of energy, a lot of power and action coming into the house of home, family, land, parents, property. So that typically coincides with some new energy, even if it's just as simple as we're doing a big spring cleaning, here in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. Or, it could be something as big as we're going to move or something like that. Now, with Venus at the heart of the sun, you could also be reworking or trying to make significant changes in family relationships or around the topic of home and marriage. And that there could be a little bit of conflict around that, given that we're talking about the sign of Mars here and that Mars is in the 6th place, which is often a little arduous. It means we're having to work through something. So if you are having to work through some degree of conflict and strife around home and family that last part of the month, don't be surprised, but it doesn't last very long. So don't stress out too much. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, so that's the main thing I wanted to say for Caps. All right, let's go forward to Aquarius rising. We're on the home stretch. Okay, so we're going to bring it back to the beginning of the month again and start off on the 3rd with Mars ingressing into Gemini in your 5th house. Here it is. Boom. So Mars enters your 5th house on the 3rd, right as Mercury and Jupiter are combining in your 1st. Love this transit. I feel like this transit is going to be all about initiating something and having the support to do it. Okay, so let me give you a few examples. We're going to have kids. We've decided we're going to have kids, or we're announcing that we're pregnant or something like that. Making an announcement about something creative or something you're going to start, or getting the motivation or inspiration to do something and then finding that you have the support there to do it. It's a good combination with Mars in the house of good fortune in Mercury's sign, while Mercury's conjoining with Jupiter in the first place, a place that's really inceptional and loves to birth new things. So I also like this as making some kind of statement, saying something publicly that needs to be said, communicating something to somebody that needs to be said, and receiving something good for having the courage to do it. Or it's like action is rewarded. Saying something, communicating something is rewarded. You do want to be careful of almost like a frivolous, arrogant, kind of vain, boastful energy. They could get a little bit captured by that with these placements. But also just the idea here that Mars in the 5th house in Gemini loves to do creative things. It loves to do mental and intellectual things that it finds enjoyable or stimulating. And Jupiter and Mercury in the 1st house is confirming upon you an idea or an enthusiasm or an inspiration or an excitement. So I love this one for Aquarians. Again, I think the downside would be almost like going overboard with something, or becoming frivolous or reckless somehow with a kind of overly cocksure, confident attitude. Okay, let's go to the 13th, which is going to be the new moon in Pisces in your 2nd house of money and finances. And this kind of goes along with that potential for it to be a good month. Maybe like it's sort of too cocksure and somehow topples over because it's not entirely real. But you can see this because you've got this big new moon lineup with Venus exalted in Pisces with Neptune in that 2nd house of money, resources, business, finances. Really good for potential developments around money and business this month for you if you're an Aquarius rising. I love it as almost like a healing that's coming in around money. This would also be something where someone could really wear rose-colored glasses and, almost like, I remember this. I remember something like a story in my life that's just popped into my head. I remember going to prom, and I remember at prom, like, I was obviously like paying for dinner, and I worked at a coffee shop. So like I had a certain amount of money, and I was just wowed by the fact that there were, the menu was like, it was just amazing. It was like this amazing menu. And I ended up spending more than I should have in order to have money for other things that I needed. So I lived outside of my means to impress my prom date. And I remember, anyway, it's a long story, but that's like, you're in an environment where suddenly you're tempted to think that you belong to an income bracket that you don't, right? Because I was in a place where most people in that place had more money to spend than I did. It was prom, right? So so you could get drawn into feeling that you have more than you do, or that something about the business or creative endeavor or something financial in nature is more than it is. And that's the thing to be careful of this month, that goes along with maybe overestimating yourself or something that's going on. So that's my warning for Aquarians. Now, the Aries ingress energy that comes right after that is going to happen on the 20th, goes into the 3rd house, and then Venus is being reset there. Again, it has the feeling to me of potential conflict in relationships, with Jupiter in the 1st house, probably due to overconfidence. And almost like, or being too dogmatic or rigid about something. Some degree of communicative conflict here could come up. And I would be careful of being a little, like comedians get on stage and they say things that normal people can't say, right? And you get a pass when you're a comedian in some ways. Like you can say all sorts of outlandish things or things that might normally offend people or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if Aquarians put their foot in their mouths this month a bit, Aquarius rising folk, right? Because this energy has the feeling with Mars in the fifth house of trying to be fun or playful. And maybe there is something fun and playful that's coming through this month. But I could see it potentially backfiring and hurting someone's feelings or getting your feelings hurt by someone. So be careful of communication the last part of the month, but also know that if there's things that you need to make clear, like if there's relationships that are killing your joy and you need to just talk about your values with someone else and maybe take something of a stand, like, hey, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is what makes me happy, this doesn't. You may have to do that. You could find a nice way of doing it. Just don't be too rigid. Okay. All right. So last but not least, and that's the 20 through the 28th at the very end there. All right. Last but not least, now it's Pisces. Okay. So we're going to go back to the beginning of the month. For Pisces, the Mars energy is entering your fourth house. That's the place of home and family and the place of land, property, and living environment. So with Mars entering that place, while Mercury and Jupiter are in the 12th, Mercury, Jupiter is pretty good, but when they're in the 12th and then Mars enters the 4th, I could see that being a conflict of ideals or beliefs within the family. I could see that coming through as almost like mental or verbal intemperance that explodes somehow within the home. Someone who's overbearing or domineering about their beliefs or ideas, a father, a parent, a spouse, a child. I could also see this as looking at old conflicts or old wounds in the family or related to parents and how they manifest in you, and how you're changing the pattern or participating in it. So ancestral work, especially around communication and around ideas and thought, beliefs. You'll notice, for example, that right as this is happening, just in the background, you'll see that the moon is going to be in its fall in the 9th house of higher beliefs, opposing Uranus on that day. So you just get the feeling here of like a ideological struggle that affects the family somehow, or a difference of opinion or values or approach or strategy within your home life that comes to the surface and probably isn't the easiest to deal with. Now, the good news for you is that the new moon is going to be, here we go. It's on the 13th. I'm going to pull the moon back just a bit here. And that's in your first house. And that's great because this is in your wheelhouse. These energies you're very used to. They're going to be more comfortable for you because they're on your ascendant. And so I would see this as a time of personal renewal. I'm pressing reset somehow. It's an existential moment where I'm redoing my character, my sense of identity, my sense of purpose, my sense of calling. What do I feel that I'm good at? What do I have to contribute to the world? You're taking stock of those things right now, probably. And there's a feeling of rebirth here. I really love this one for Pisces rising. The only thing is, don't get caught up in any kind of delusion about yourself. Don't try to kid yourself or pretend to be someone that you're not. Don't be self-deceived somehow. The romantic energy is very strong. Don't be surprised if people want to give you things or are very attracted to you this month with that exalted Venus in your first house, or if you're just in a more creative or romantic space. Don't let the longings pull you off course. Just standard advice. Now, that comes back again on the 29th with the Mercury-Neptune dynamic again. So creative, almost like a stream of consciousness feeling coming through your first house this month. But again, you just want to make sure that you're the rational quality. It's interesting that the Mercury in Pisces will go through the little bit of a square to Mars, right? So that square in the 4th house, conflict in in the mind, right? And emotion around home and family and identity. Those things could come up pretty powerfully, but I do think the potential for healing is there. All right, then you've got the Aries ingress. And the Aries ingress comes right off from the new moon on the 20th. And then again, through the end of the month, you're going to see the two of them conjoining in your second house. Brings a lot of powerful energy into your financial house. Could bring some degree of conflict in relationships relative to money or business or finances. Or it could bring some need to revise or revamp something, some kind of agreement. Or a contract or something like that. So Venus represents agreements, and then the Cazimi with the sun, just kind of this rebirth in Mars's sign, a little bit of conflict around it. Could also be something about buying something for the home, since the dispositor is Mars in the fourth place of home and family. So maybe purchases or money relative to home could be coming up at the end of the month. All right. That is what I've got for you guys today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and all right, so I'm tuning into you guys now back on YouTube. Is there any questions that you guys have before we go? Because I'd be happy to try to answer anything briefly if I can. And if not, we'll sign off for the day. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful to hear, some of the basics of what's going on. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I had a really rough night of sleeping. And so whenever that happens, I find myself struggling to find words or stumbling over my words a lot. So I apologize to everybody for that today. You guys are always gracious. I appreciate it. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any new questions in the chat box. So I think, how can we look at this in progressives? I think you probably mean progressions. So you don't, you just, you always, I wouldn't say you use your birth chart to look at, not your progressions, in my opinion. Let's see. People tuning in from lots of places. Wow. I think it's crazy how people find my channel. Like, that's nuts. I have Venus in Pisces. Is this a good transit for me? Yeah, it's a Venus return. It's in your wheelhouse. You should feel, it depends on what house it's in, but you should feel good about that. The full moon in Libra in the fourth house for Cancer. Yeah, I mean, if you have a Libra in fourth house, the full moon will be there. That's going to come through toward the end of the month, and that will emphasize. Again, you're going to look at the tension between the workplace, and home and family life. There's a lot of tension happening in those two areas simultaneously. So watch for the full moon to amplify the need to tend to relationships, specifically around home and family. Yeah, I can't go through all of them, but how do you see buying a house for Pisces rising this year? Let me just hold on. Let me just just helps me to just look at a chart. Yeah, I think specifically if you're thinking of buying a house and you're a Pisces, because the energy is going to be, the Pisces energy puts Gemini in your fourth house, that you're going to see the eclipse in June and the Mercury retrograde in June as an opportunity to start a new chapter around home and property. So I would say the June 10th solar eclipse in your fourth house is going to be the most auspicious in terms of a time where you might see buying a house. Someone says telling Aquarius to be less rigid is like Coca-Cola telling be less white. I don't think I understand it, but I guess, yeah, it might not be easy. Just especially when you have Saturn in your first house, don't get too zealous about things. Anytime anyone has Saturn in the first, that's a good message. All right, well, I'm not seeing a lot of new questions, so I'm going to end for today. I hope you guys have a fantastic month of March. We'll get some timestamps on these eventually. And I also recommend listening back to this as the month goes on. Like come back and re-listen. We'll have the timestamp, come back and re-listen to your sign. And if you see something, that's really radically different from some of the basic outlines that I give archetypally, I'd really love to hear about those, to hear what your experiences are in the chat box, because I learn a lot from that. And I really appreciate having new dimensions of the transits to consider in my mind. So you guys have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow.